everyone for joining today. My name is Glenn Geher, last name rhymes with hair, and I teach in the psychology department at the State University of New York at New Paltz, or what we call SUNY New Paltz, and I've been teaching here since 2000, which if that seems like a long time, you would be correct. And I do research with a whole bunch of students on lots of topics. I teach courses related to evolution and behavior, and I also teach courses in statistics, which I find a lot of fun, and maybe the students do as well. I have been involved in Heterodox and sort of the Heterodox movement for a while, and I think you'll see when I give my presentation how I got connected and what my angle is on this kind of thing. And I work with undergraduate students extensively, and I see working with undergraduate students as the number one role or the number one goal actually of absolutely any university or college worldwide. That's my particular angle. I think this is the primary mission of what we're doing. Teaching you all and developing leadership skills to really bring you guys to where you need to be into the future. So I'm more than glad to be here today. Thank you, Daniel, and to the Heterodox Academy for having me. And let me get started. I do have a slideshow, which my students who know me know that I'm usually just like a piece of chalk or a marker, but I figured for this I was going to put together a slideshow. Everyone, if you nod or thumbs up if you can see the screen. Okay, cool. So there's several different parts of my presentation. And I will, so I like to kind of start by telling you what I'm going to tell you, partly because this keeps me on track. I found that this is a useful way to sort of organize presentations. So I'm going to be talking about how I got interested in the heterodox movement. What I find is that everyone has a different story. A lot of times there are parallel stories, and there are definitely themes, common themes, but everyone who's really interested in this initiative, which is very much a global initiative, has a unique story to tell, which I find pretty fascinating. So I'll tell you about my story and my background. And then I want to give specific guidance that connects with the primary function of today's meeting, which is guidance for undergraduate students whose thinking cuts across prevailing narratives. And I'll explain kind of what I mean by that. So how to be an undergraduate heterodox thinker effectively, essentially. Number three, I'd like to step back and give guidance for any undergraduate students. Like I said, I've been teaching and I've been an academic advisor to students here at New Paltz since 2000. I was department chair for 8 years, and I've met with thousands of undergrad students over the years. And I think I have at least, a smidge of general guidance that I think and hope that you guys will find useful. And then we'll go to the question and answer. So I'll tell you how I got interested in the heterodox movement. I teach evolutionary psychology, and I didn't realize how naive I was at the time when I started teaching this. I truly had no idea that this was considered a controversial area, because if you've ever taken a course in evolutionary psychology and you're like me, it's amazing. It is an incredibly powerful, different, novel way of understanding the human behavioral experience. And in my own experience, I started learning about this really during my doctoral time at the University of New Hampshire back in the day, where I got a PhD in social psychology. But largely, it was kind of after. And I started doing reading on lots of topics related to evolution and behavior. And I ran into work by David Buss, and I ran into work by Richard Dawkins and Robert Trivers, and these are kind of some of the big names in the field. And at least as I saw it, I was like, wow, this just like sheds so much light on everything that behavioral scientists are studying. And I found it exciting and fascinating. and logical. You know, I teach statistics also, which I don't think is coincidental. It's almost a probabilistic or statistically oriented way of understanding how human behavioral patterns came to be. So when I was younger in my career, I was super excited about this idea. When I got hired at SUNY New Paltz in the psychology department, at some point, might have been a year or two into my position here, I I wanted to teach evolutionary psychology. I wanted to propose a new course and have it added to the curriculum. And there's a bunch of paperwork. And so I did the paperwork and I made a model syllabus and I put it forward to the department chair, which was the process. And I didn't expect, I just thought this thing was going to get rubber stamped. It was a wicked detailed syllabus. I had really thought it through. I taught it as a special topics at another university and it went really well. And oh my God, there were meetings with faculty about this topic. And meetings back then, mind you, were between 2 and 3 hours. And it was at least 3 full meetings where nothing was on the agenda except for whether this course should ethically exist in the curriculum. And it was mind-boggling to me. It was so it was shocking. It was absolutely I look back now and I'm like, I guess I shouldn't have been shocked or, you know, but it was absolutely shocking to me. And I was like, oh my goodness. And people were sort of, there was accusations of like sexism and accusations of racism and accusations of eugenics and like every terrible thing in the world was, you know, was kind of being thrown at me simply because I thought evolution was really relevant to behavior and really wanted to teach a course on it to our students so that they could gain insights from Charles Darwin's way of understanding the living experience. So this was absolutely, it was crazy to me, to be honest. It was a bit deflating. Also, I had just moved here. My wife was pregnant when we moved here. We had bought a house. By the time I was offering this, I think she might have been pregnant with our second kid, Andrew. Our daughter Megan was little. Like I wasn't moving. You know what I mean? Like these people are not gonna, you know, this pressure against this course was not going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. You know, I love New Paltz. I love the students here. I love working here, but it was a very, very difficult experience. At some point, and so this is what I did. At some point, I became good friends with a guy named David Sloan Wilson. So this is part of my way of addressing this particular issue. David is a very famous evolutionary biologist at Binghamton, and he studies, among other things, human behavior from an evolutionary perspective. And he started an interdisciplinary program. So not just within one department, but one that connected courses across many departments at Binghamton. And it was called EVOS, or Evolutionary Studies, and had courses in biology and anthropology and economics and psychology. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like, that makes so much more sense. Like a course like evolutionary psych, while it is in the psych department, I did win that battle, by the way. It was hard as hell. I was like, this makes so much sense in an interdisciplinary evolutionary studies program. So I met with David. I've become good friends with him ever since. And he came to New Paltz and I worked, you know, under his guidance with people in various departments, and we created an interdisciplinary evolutionary studies program that was launched in 2007. And I've been now my position now is founding director. Tom Nolan in biology is the academic director, so we kind of split responsibilities. But I've pretty much been running or co-running this program ever since, and it's been great. It's been a really great way. And the students who are in evolutionary studies who take the evolutionary psych class, they love it. You know, they report getting a lot out of it. They see it as highly applicable to all kinds of things. So that's been a really good thing for me. You know, I kind of turned lemons into lemonade a bit. And I think that sometimes when your ideas are not with the prevailing narrative, you got to find ways to do that. Bullet point number 2, now I can see I have to be relatively mindful of my own time. But I'll tell you about our first speaker. So the Evolutionary Studies program has a speaker series. We're actually in our 14th annual offering right now, which is, it's going really well in spite of the pandemic. Um, but our first ever speaker was Lionel Tiger. Lionel Tiger was a anthropology professor at Rutgers. He was the Charles Darwin Professor of Anthropology. And someone on our board suggested he'd be a good speaker. And I'm like, well, if he's the Charles Darwin Professor, it sounds about right. I didn't know too much about him. It turns out that he's, I guess, pretty controversial for some of the things that he's written across his career. And he had written a Wall Street Journal piece making the case that women's studies programs should be shut down. And that got into the hands of faculty on our campus right before the visit. And I'd never experienced, I'd only sort of heard of these things. There was essentially a protest. Um, and this poor guy, he was in his 70s at the time. He was such a grandpa. And so like he came and like these people were like screaming at him, and they had like these sheets that had these out of context quotes of his from his career of 50 years, you know. So it was like the worst things that he had said across 50 years. And it was, you know, and I was the host, you know, and this was our first talk in the speaker series with this program that I had worked so hard to create, partly to try to, you know, stop, you know, get beyond the resistance to the evolutionary perspective. So it was really something of a speed bump at the very least, I'll put it that way. Um, since then, uh, I'll tell you, my research team and I did an entire paper. We did a whole study where we actually examined some of the political attitudes surrounding the resistance to Lionel Tiger's talk. And we actually got a publication out of it. I actually wrote a blog in the Heterodox blogosphere about that pretty recently, if you're interested. But again, we turned that, you know, we pivoted that negative experience into an opportunity. But you can start to see, so that was another thing that got me really interested in this heterodox idea. A few years later, there was a conservative speaker. This was actually 2016, Cliff Kincaid, before the presidential election. Cliff Kincaid was going to come speak on campus. He's like a real like hyper conservative pundit, I guess would be kind of what people would call him. Word got out about some of the things that he had said, and I didn't know anything about this guy. And he got uninvited. He got the old disinvite, and there was a lot of disinvite stuff going on at that particular time. And me and a lot of other faculty, or some other faculty, were vocal and we're like, this is not right. You know, you might not like this guy's politics, but a university should be an open context for discussion, for dialogue, for ideas. Like that's the whole point of the university. It was like seems so inconsistent with the telos or the telos, the goal of a university to sort of, you know, squelch certain voices or certain ideas. It just seemed absolutely out of control. So I was asked, I was one of the more vocal people saying, you know, this is a real problem and we need to address it. And the president, Don Christian, president of our university, appointed me as the chair of his free speech task force, which was kind of designed to help our campus navigate this issue. And gosh, what a story. It was like from the frying pan into the fire, into a deeper fire. So what we did was we invited Jonathan Haidt, who's of course the primary founder of the Heterodox Academy, to come speak. He had just spoken as the keynote speaker for the American Psychological Association like a month or two prior. So this was not like we were bringing in a fringe speaker by any means. And it was such a unique experience because he talked about whether universities are primarily about advancing knowledge or whether they are primarily about advancing a social justice agenda, and how those two goals are not really consistent with each other and you can't really have both at all times. And he gave lots of research examples and it was very well presented. And I just thought it was great. and it was just maybe about 300 people in the room, back when we were allowed to do that kind of thing before the pandemic. And at the end of the talk, I like turned around and like, I'm going to say 98% of my colleagues were furious, like as if whatever was said was somehow taboo, which was kind of Jonathan Haidt's point, was that going against certain narratives in the academy is blasphemy, is the equivalent of going against religious scripture or doctrine. And it was so unbelievably ironic to see this playing out. And in fact, people demanded that we have a standalone all-campus meeting to discuss that talk 2 months after that talk took place. So it was like there was nothing else people were talking about on campus for months after that talk, and it was absolutely fascinating. And of course, I'm always the guy, so I'm like organizing that meeting and overseeing and moderating that meeting, and I was like, oh my God, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So then, so I joined the Heterodox Academy pretty early on after Jonathan Haidt came to speak. But if you want to hear something disappointing, he put out an invite when he was on campus to all faculty to join the Heterodox Academy. And I think I checked and there was like 4, including our president, myself, and 2 other members of the task force. And what's sad to me, what's disappointing to me, is that the movement, the heterodox movement, it's not a right-wing movement. It's not a right-wing conspiracy. It's the fact that it's framed like that to me is very concerning. Politically, I certainly don't see myself there at all, but it's framed that way. It's seen as that way. Our minds are so in-group, out-group oriented, so us and them oriented, that it really got framed that way. So very difficult, and I would say now, actually, some people on my research team have actually studied perceptions of the heterodox movement. We actually have research on this topic. And, we are finding that there's a strong tendency for various people, especially academics, to sort of hold some of these ideas. So it's really a conundrum to sort of get out of. So there's another related organization called the Heterodox Psychology Workshop, headed by Richard Redding at Chapman University, soon going to be changed to the Open Inquiry in Behavioral Science. Very, very spot on with the mission of the Heterodox Academy. And we've held 2 conferences. This is like kind of like heterodox stuff, but for psychology and the behavioral sciences in particular. And I've been very involved. I'm actually on the executive board of that particular group, and have been really trying very hard to try to advance a genuinely heterodox world within the academy, as much as one person can have an influence. Because to the extent that we're shutting people down because we don't like their ideas and we don't even want to listen to their ideas, that's really problematic. So this is how I got interested in the movement, and this is kind of where I am now. In fact, this is my greatest non-publication. So not to like be boastful by any means, but I'll tell you, I've been in academia for a long time, and I've got over 100 academic publications. So I'm not like a superstar, but like I know when something's publishable, I'll put it that way. And this is my research team, all the bold-faced names are students and alumni of mine. We did a study where we asked a lot of questions related to what Jonathan Haidt talked about on our campus. We did this study where we studied political attitudes and academic values to see, are there some academics who value social justice more than advancing knowledge? Are there some academics who value emotional support of students over academic rigor, academic knowledge? So we have these different values, and what we found was, I think, pretty fascinating and eye-opening. We found there was a political orientation effect. So conservative faculty were more likely to value academic rigor and advancing knowledge. People who identified as relatively liberal were more likely to advance social justice and student emotional support. We found a gender difference. We found that female faculties, or I guess a sex difference, women were more likely to support a social justice initiative, and men were more likely to support an academic rigor and advancing knowledge initiative. And we just kind of thought this was interesting information for people to know. My team tried to publish it in journal after journal after journal, and it got rejected and rejected and rejected. And at some point I just said, you know what, forget it. We're going to self-publish it. The only time I've ever done this. And so this is actually the official APA reference. And we do have, self-published manuscript in there, but it was just another place where we found that people didn't like the idea. This was being reviewed by academics. It was critical of the academy, and it was a hard sell. It was a hard sell. But again, the fact that it was so hard to publish this speaks so much to how, if your ideas aren't the right ideas, we don't want to hear them. That's the real short version of, I think, what's going on. So when we talk about like the prevailing narrative, which is a phrase that I think is very useful, it's like there are certain ideas that are sort of, you could say politically correct, or like okay, or ideas that are consistent with common ideologies within the academy. And if your ideas are like against the prevailing narrative or not totally consistent, it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell. And academia, I would say, has a lot of that kind of thing going on. But this is on my website, and if you want to actually read the paper, it's totally available for free. So that's my history with, I guess that's a brief history that I have with the heterodox kind of thing. Like I said, it started with my love of evolutionary psychology, and kind of went from there. But you could see I was department chair for 8 years. I've been full professor since, 2008, something like that. This going against the prevailing narrative in a lot of ways has hardly slowed me down. And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to impart, is that there's ways to have ideas that you study, inquire about, and advance that might not be consistent with the prevailing narrative, but you don't have to let that stop you or slow you down. So this next section is about guidance for undergrads whose thinking cuts across the prevailing narrative. So 5 points I've got here. Realize that you're not alone. When I saw the resistance I ran into regarding evolutionary psychology, I talked to a couple other people at some of the schools within a state or two of New York, and there were a few other evolutionary psychologists running into the same thing. So guess what we did? We formed the Northeastern Evolutionary Psychology Society, which upon its first meeting in 2007, had people from Canada, California, Europe. People came from like all over. Like, I was like, wait a minute, this was a good idea. So if you're finding that you have some ideology or something that you're really interested in, that you believe in strongly, and it seems like no one else around you does, it's an international community nowadays, and there's strength in numbers. So realize that you're probably not alone. And I would say that being in the room now and joining groups like the Heterodox Academy is probably a really smart and good start. Another thing that I like to impart to people is that we're all in this together. And I do think that I've developed a decent reputation as, while I don't agree with everyone's ideas, I try to be super open and respectful at any and all points, especially with people whose ideas are at odds with my own. I'm a big believer that we have something to learn from everyone. I write a blog for Psychology Today, and a phrase I often use in there is, we all have a ticket on the same ride. And I really, truly believe that. My late friend, Peter Kaufman, who was a sociology faculty member here, super amazingly nice guy, very renowned for his teaching. He had all these great teaching activities. And one of them was he would have every student pair up and write something down that you think that other person doesn't know that you know, and vice versa. And what he would demonstrate, and then people would divulge, and I would say, like, if it were me and Daniel, I would learn whatever Daniel was going to teach me, and he would learn whatever it was that I had to know. And then people would share these in the classroom, and everyone knows 30 new things at the end of that. And everyone viscerally gets the understanding that we all have something to learn from every other person. I think that's such a powerful idea. So while it's really easy to get annoyed with people that are resistant, that are politically um, making things difficult for us to study something or advance something or even think something, at the end of the day, realizing that we have things to learn from people who are, quote, on the other side or share a different perspective, I think that's very important. And in my career, I think that's been really something I strive very hard to do. Related to that, point number three, avoid the ad hominem attack. Ad hominem is Latin for at another human. And it's so common for, if people are arguing about ideas, it's really easy to slip into arguing against the person. So if someone's trying to make an argument to me supporting like maybe like a postmodernist perspective on something that I don't really agree with, it's one thing for me to say, well, there's problems with that line of reasoning. It doesn't stand up to these data over here. It's a different thing altogether to say, you're an idiot. It's the problem is people like you, that kind of thing. It's easy to slip into ad hominem reasoning. It's extremely easy. It's very human. All the social psychological literature on this topic suggests it's remarkably human. And it's also something that if we're cognizant about, we can actually sort of step back and sort of not go that particular route. So avoid the ad hominem attack at all costs. The phrase my friend Melanie Hill uses is that you get more bees with honey. So, you know, trying to avoid sort of attacking people who are on the other side or whatever is usually ineffective in a variety of ways. If you're somehow, here's the other side of that. If you're somehow being treated unfairly, and I've had students who supported Donald Trump as an example, and I'm like the only person that they told that. They're like, we feel like we can tell you this. I don't feel like I can tell anyone else in this community of 10,000 people this information. Just because I'm not going to, I'm not going to tell you my own political angle or take, because that's not really the point of this. But I'm certainly of the opinion that whatever a student's political background or ideological background is, he or she is entitled to it. I mean, Trump supporters on our campus in 2016, it was really very distressing and difficult to see how they were treated. And I think that, if you're finding that whatever whatever your ideology is having you treated unfairly by faculty, by other students, by administrators, by whomever, realize that every university has processes. Every university is ultimately about the students. And if you're running into some kind of problems like that, some professor in a classroom is sort of shunning you because you said this one time, there's a department chair you can talk to. There's a dean that you can talk to above that. There's a provost that you can talk to. There's written processes for all these things regarding grievances and complaints and that kind of thing. So always realize that you probably have an academic advisor, and your academic advisor should always be able to help guide you toward those kinds of processes. At the end of the day, universities are about supporting and cultivating our students. So do realize that there are channels at your university if you're running into problems. And realize that Heterodox really runs the gamut of the political and ideological spectrum. I know that I think this is probably typical of a lot of people in the movement, but this isn't a right-wing conspiracy movement. This is a push to get open-mindedness advanced within the academy. Universities were designed to be open to a broad array of ideas. It's really the only way that new knowledge can really advance. And that's really what this is. So realize that heterodox is something that spans the, the gamut. And I think that's also something that's really important to understand. Final bit that I'm going to talk about is guidance for any undergraduate student. So like I said, I've been in this field for a long time. I was department chair for 8 years. When I was done with that, I felt like I had guided so many students towards so many things, and I wanted to write it all down. So I did. I wrote it all down. I submitted it to the American Psychological Association and ended up publishing this book called Own Your Psychology Major, A Guide to Student Success. So I thought I would just take a little bit of time during this meeting and just for whatever it's worth, give some kind of broader guidance that hopefully will resonate and be useful. So here's a short list of suggestions to help you thrive as an undergrad and beyond. It's mostly one thing that you should realize, and if you're in the room right now, you already get it, it is the stuff outside the classroom that really shines. So every now and then we'll have a student who will have like an almost 4.0. And when we discuss as a faculty whether that student should get like the outstanding student award, if that student hasn't done research with a professor or hasn't been a leader in a club, or we don't really know the student outside the classroom, it's a kind of tough sell. It really is the students who step above and beyond who really end up shining in so many ways. Leadership in clubs is a big one. I remember the student Jamie, she came to me when she was 18, brand new freshman, never did much in high school other than study and do well, got into our school, which is a good school. And she was like, what can I do to make this a great experience? And I said, the psychology club is about to meet in 20 minutes down the hall. Maybe go there and give it a try. There were 4 students, including Jamie, at that meeting. There were 4 leadership positions that were filled at that meeting. She walked out of that meeting at 18 years old, being the secretary for the psych club. The next year, she was the vice president. The next year, she was the president. The next year, she was the president of Psych-Hi. She ended up getting a doctoral degree related to cognitive neuroscience. She took advantage of opportunities when they were handed to her. She did a great job of it. And I've seen time and time again, that is a great thing to do. So there might be, if you're interested in the heterodox movement, you might be able to actually start a heterodox club on your campus or something related or something connected. I think that would be great. And what I've seen is that students in these positions tend to just really succeed. Internships, whatever field you're in, try to do some kind of internship, either within your curriculum, or sometimes it could be volunteering over the summer or shadowing someone in the field that you're interested in. Internships are things that really set people apart and give people a really good sense of, what's it like beyond your college years. Volunteering for the community, there's always all kinds of opportunities to volunteer. Our campus has like an April cleanup, there's like cleanup day, and there's groups of students and faculty that get together and put on the rubber gloves and clean things up. There are so many opportunities for volunteering, for supporting the community, and those things really matter and bring people together in a very positive way. Research with a professor, and especially if you're interested in heterodox kinds of things, find a faculty member who's doing research that's of interest to you. Maybe there's that professor that's studying, non-postmodernist kinds of ideas that really is of interest to you. This could be a great way, if there's a faculty member at your school, especially in your major, who's doing research consistent with things that you're interested in, do that. You could end up going to conferences, you could end up co-authoring academic papers. There's so much. Students who work and do research with me end up getting a ton of experience, transferable skills. And definitely there's usually ways to do that within your curriculum, so you can get credit for that. There are so many of those kinds of opportunities, and taking advantage of those opportunities is going to be so much in your interest and have long-term benefits. you should meet with faculty to carve out your future. You know, we've been around and helping you get into graduate programs, career paths, ways to get involved. Like I said, when Jamie came up to me, she was like, "What can I do to get more involved?" I knew that the psych club meeting was down the hall in 20 minutes. You know, faculty, our entire job is about cultivating your future, you know, so think about that. That's what I get paid to do. That's what we get paid to do. So meet with your advisor, you know, not just to get your clearance for your registration, but about your future, you know, about should I study abroad? Should I double major? Should I minor? Um, if you're interested in alternative perspectives that aren't really with the prevailing narrative, you know, talk to your advisor about how can you do work related to that somehow that's advancing what you're doing. We're here to help, and we know about opportunities for students and try to provide those as best we can. You should navigate the fundamental human conflict. So I think university is a great way to really like experience what David Wilson calls the fundamental human conflict, or maybe this is my words of his ideas, I'm not quite sure, but he talks about multi-level selection. And he talks about at any given time, we're experiencing within group pressures. So like within a group, there's pressures for you to outcompete others to benefit yourself. If you're thinking about Fortnite, for instance, this is like solo mode. But then other times we're in what he would call a between group pressure situation. So in Fortnite, this would be like if you're in like squad mode, right? And it's different, right? And in life, we're constantly finding ourselves navigating both of those things. Humans are a very groupish species. And in college, you learn about getting along well in a group and having your group thrive and reach goals and so forth. And you're also advancing yourself in a lot of ways. You want a high GPA, you want you to get into a good grad program and so forth. So figuring out how to navigate those fundamental features of the human experience through your college experience, I'd say is a major goal of what you should be doing during these 4 years. Related to that, you know, an other oriented reputation really goes a long way. So again, you can see I'm very big into community. I'm very big into joining groups and kicking in. And I think, you know, this is a really good way too. If you have some ideological thing that really doesn't sit that well with other people, but you get yourself a reputation as an altruist, as someone who's other oriented, someone who's a team leader, someone who's, you know, willing to pitch in, that really can go a long way in every domain. We published, this is a publication by myself and 2 of my students on that topic. So just to sort of end up, I'd say work hard and work toward the common good, because you guys, I'm looking in your eyes right now, you guys are the future. And for a bottom line, I'd say be honest, be bold, and be kind. And that's my cat Zuko. Isn't he cute? He says, "Thank you for listening." And with that, I will be more than glad to answer any questions. So thank you so much.